In the dim light of my barracks room, I felt the need to preface my tale with a simple truth. Every word of this story is genuine. Now, I know that's a common refrain, especially when one wants to draw listeners into their narrative's embrace, but I assure you, this isn't a mere ploy. Who I believe every eerie detail of what transpired? Not entirely. I've always been a skeptic, questioning the shadows that dance in the corners of our eyes. Some might argue that my friends played an elaborate prank on me, but there are aspects of this tale that make such a theory hard to swallow. Could it have been mass hysteria? Perhaps. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In 2009, I enlisted in the Army. My advanced individual training took place at Fort Redstone, Arizona. If you've ever met a soldier from there, you'd know they often jestingly refer to it as Fort Trickster. The reason being, the majority of the military occupational specialties, MOS, stationed there require a high aptitude score. The friends I made were an eclectic mix, many of us united by our shared love for gaming. The base itself was a stone's throw from the Mexican border and a few hours' drive from the legendary Tombstone, Arizona. One idle evening, as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, we found ourselves sharing ghost stories. Bradley, a buddy of mine, had recently procured a spirit board from a local Walmart. Now, whether Bradley was a believer in the paranormal or just bored out of his wits, I couldn't say. But when you're a soldier with more free time than money, you tend to make some questionable entertainment choices. We tried our luck with the spirit board in our barracks, hoping to tap into the base's rumored haunted past. But the spirits, it seemed, weren't in a chatty mood. Growing weary of the mundane, Bradley and I yearned for a genuine adventure. The tales of Tombstone beckoned. Bradley's eyes sparkled with mischief when I suggested a visit. He'd recently heard whispers of a haunted house there, and the idea of investigating it was too tantalizing to resist. We roped in Harrison, another mate, and set off, reaching Tombstone just as nightfall draped its dark veil over the town. Contrary to my expectations of a desolate ghost town, Tombstone was alive and buzzing. Sure, there were remnants of its Wild West past, but it was largely a typical town with its share of touristy spots. We ventured into the residential area, searching for the rumored haunted house. After some aimless wandering, we paused, each of us taking a moment to relieve ourselves. I was the first to return to the car, followed shortly by Bradley. Harrison, however, was nowhere in sight. Just as worry began to gnaw at my insides, Harrison burst onto the scene, his face ashen, his southern drawl more pronounced as he panted, "You ain't gonna believe this, man. I went into this old, seemingly abandoned house. Thought I'd have a smoke and shoot you guys a text. But then, something or someone touched my shoulder. I exchanged a glance with Bradley, both of us waiting with bated breath for Harrison to continue. Harrison's voice trembled as he recounted the chilling touch. I turned around, expecting to see someone. But there was nothing. Just the cold, empty air. His words hung heavily in the silence of the car. Driven by a mix of adrenaline, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of foolhardiness, I proposed an idea. Why don't we park nearby and try the spirit board from the safety of the car? The others hesitated for a moment, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. We found a spot about half a block away, and with bated breath, set the board on our laps. Taking on the role of the questioner, I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Is there anyone here with us?" To my astonishment, the Planchet began to move, gliding towards yes. My heart raced. "Were you the one who touched Harrison?" Again, the answer was yes. But when I asked if it was the spirit of the haunted house we had sought, the board responded with a surprising no. This unexpected answer threw me off. If this was a prank by one of my friends, why not play into our fears? It would be like a scammer offering you a fortune and then turning down a higher amount. It didn't make sense. Images of every eerie spirit board story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind. I wanted our session to stand out, to be different. We weren't just a group of frightened kids. We were trained, intelligent soldiers. If this entity was real, I wanted to engage it in a way that no one had before. I pondered, trying to think of questions that weren't the usual fare. Instead of the typical, "How did you die?" I wanted to delve deeper, to ask something that would catch it off guard. Taking a deep breath, I asked, "What was the building you touched Harrison and used for?" The Planchet began its dance once more. I smirked, thinking it would give a mundane answer. But it spelled out slaughter. The word sent chills down my spine. It wasn't a term commonly used in modern times. If this was a prank, my friends were doing an exceptional job. Curiosity piqued. I continued my line of questioning. "Why did you touch Harrison?" The board spelled out help. The atmosphere in the car grew heavy. "When did you pass away?" I asked. 1867, came the reply. I racked my brain for more unique questions. I'd once heard you should never ask a spirit board about God. Being an atheist, I couldn't resist. "Why shouldn't I ask you about God?" The answer was swift and firm. "No." Trying to lighten the mood, I asked, "If you played World of Warcraft, which class would you choose?" Expecting a humorous response, I was taken aback when it spelled out stab. The entity's responses, though conveyed only through the movement of the Planchet, seemed to carry an emotional weight. I was about to dive deeper when my phone rang, shattering the tense atmosphere. It was our first sergeant, demanding our immediate return to base due to a missing weapon. Reluctantly, we packed up and headed back. The next day, as we recounted our eerie experience to our platoon, most dismissed our tale. But one soldier, Foster, leaned in, his interest clearly piqued. With the eerie events of the previous night still fresh in our minds, we resolved to make another attempt at communicating with the ghost. Foster, who had shown interest in our tale, offered his SUV for the endeavor, providing us with more space to conduct our session. As a soldier, I'd always been trained to plan meticulously, and this situation was no different. Given the unsettling nature of our previous encounter, I felt it was crucial to have a clear strategy in place, not only for our arrival and departure, but also for any unforeseen circumstances. I briefed the group, emphasizing the importance of being prepared for any unexpected events. Our standard operating procedure, SOP, was as follows. We would depart for Tombstone around 9 in the evening, ensuring our arrival after dark. We'd use 2 vehicles, Foster's SUV and Bradley's coupe. Bradley and Harrison would travel in the coupe, while Foster and I would take the SUV. Our session would be conducted in the SUV, allowing for a swift exit if needed. We also agreed to leave any potential weapons or sharp objects behind. After all, if spirits could only harm through physical means, eliminating such objects would reduce the risk. In the event that any of us felt an overwhelming sense of dread or unease, we had a signal to alert the others to pack up and leave immediately. Once we left the scene, we'd rendezvous and establish contact via phone to ensure everyone's safety and to debrief on the experience. With our plan in place, we felt invincible. The supernatural had nothing on Arizona's finest. Parking in the same spot as the previous night, we set up the spirit board. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and despite our bravado, I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety. The events of the previous night had shaken my understanding of reality. It was as if we had stumbled upon a hidden layer of existence, one that defied logic. Foster, having been raised in a Catholic household, was visibly on edge. Though he had distanced himself from his religious upbringing, the deep-seated fear of the spirit board remained. He chose to observe from a distance. We began our session, placing our hands on the Planchet. "Is anyone there?" we asked. The response was a slow, deliberate yes. I inquired if it was the same entity we had spoken to the night before. The answer was a clear no. Determined to maintain control of the conversation, I decided to probe deeper, aiming to uncover the entity's limitations. "What is the one thing you desire most but cannot have?" I asked. The board spelled out a heart-wrenching reply. "Life." Before I could process the profound sadness of that answer, the interior lights of Foster's SUV began to flicker erratically. The atmosphere in the car grew thick with tension. This was no ordinary malfunction. It felt as if the spirit was asserting its presence. Regaining my composure, I pondered my next question. Harrison, however, beat me to it. With a hint of defiance in his Georgian accent, he asked, "What do you want from us?" The Planchet moved with a purpose, spelling out a name. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My full name is Brian, but no one there, except Harrison, knew that. The movement of the Planchet was peculiar, as if an unseen force from the front of the car was manipulating it. Before I could fully process what was happening, the center console, which was slightly ajar, slammed shut on its own. Keeping my voice steady, I said, "Okay, guys, it just spelled out my first name. We need to leave. Now." Without a word, Harrison and Bradley bolted from the SUV, making a beeline for Bradley's Eclipse. Foster and I, still reeling from the shock, quickly took the front seats of the SUV. Foster, with a sense of urgency, shifted into drive and sped out of the lot. The Chevy Traverse, ironically, was living up to its name. As we raced down Arizona's Route 82, the weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. My once firm atheistic beliefs were now in turmoil, while Foster, a devout man, seemed to grapple with doubts of his own. Our introspection was interrupted by the jarring sound of Foster's rock ringtone. It was a stark contrast to the eerie atmosphere, grounding us momentarily in the familiar. Foster answered the call. It was Bradley and Harrison. Their car had failed to start, and they were stranded. Foster's reaction was immediate. He made a sharp U-turn, pushing the SUV to its limits as we sped back to Tombstone. But in our haste, we lost our bearings. Tombstone, though small, was a maze in the dark. Suddenly, Foster's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice trembling. I can't control the car. It's like something's taken over." My heart raced. We were now faced with two possible scenarios. Foster was either under some supernatural influence or experiencing a severe mental breakdown. Either way, our safety was at risk. Relying on my military training, I barked out a command. "Foster, stop the car." Now. After a tense moment, he managed to pull over. Switching places with him, I took the wheel. As we continued our drive, Bradley called again, informing us they were safe and on their way back to the base. Foster, still in a daze, slowly began to come around. Strangely, as we distanced ourselves from the site of our eerie encounter, his demeanor improved. This observation led me to a chilling hypothesis. If spirits are indeed real, they might possess a limited range of influence, perhaps about a quarter mile. The journey back was thick with tension. Foster, his voice barely above a whisper, began to share his experience. He felt an overwhelming urge, a voice in his head, urging him to drive down a secluded alley. The intent was clear. The spirit wanted him to harm me. "It wanted you, Brian," Foster murmured, his eyes distant. "It wanted me to end you." He speculated that our swift exit had caught the entity off guard, prompting it to immobilize Bradley's car as a ploy to draw us back. "Why didn't it just harm me directly?" I asked, trying to make sense of the night's events. Foster looked at me, his gaze piercing. "You're a logical thinker, hard to manipulate. I, on the other hand, am more emotionally driven, making me an easier target. Plus, I was the one controlling the vehicle." The implications were chilling. If the spirit had succeeded, the incident would have been dismissed as a tragic case of one soldier turning on another. The media would likely have attributed it to PTSD or some other psychological strain. It made me wonder about other inexplicable tragedies, like parents suddenly harming their children. Could malevolent spirits be behind such acts, only for them to be misattributed to mental breakdowns? As we neared the halfway point to the base, we pulled into a gas station. Foster, still not entirely himself, abruptly opened the SUV's hatch. He pulled out a sunshade, an accessory that came with his vehicle, and discarded it in a nearby dumpster. "Why did you do that?" I asked, puzzled. "It felt tainted. Evil," he replied, his voice quivering. This act solidified my belief that we weren't victims of some elaborate prank. Why would Foster dispose of a valuable part of his car just to maintain a ruse, especially when I was already shaken to my core? While I remain an atheist, the events of that night have made me more open to the possibility of the paranormal. I often liken communicating with spirits to trying to converse with an unseen entity in another realm, whose only means of interaction is manipulating a piece of paper with a fan. Such limited communication would explain the slow and terse responses we received. Later, I delved deeper into the history of the location. Our parking spot that night. It was adjacent to the Silver Lagoon, a site infamous for its hauntings and the location of the legendary gunfight in the 1800s. Although the gunfight occurred after the date the spirit had mentioned, it made me wonder if we had inadvertently communicated with one of the souls from that fateful day.